Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition. We are so grateful that you can join us. And over the next 2 hours, we're going to cover a lot of different topics. Obviously, we're going to talk about the mask mandates and vaccines and a few things like that. But we're also going to cover a few issues that we've only just sort of mentioned this week. Some of those things like, for example, the latest report on climate change, what's happening in the schools, and a variety of other topics. We will do our best in 2 hours to try to cover as much as we possibly can. But if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford with us, as always, and Penna Dexter.
Wow, I think we need a shoehorn today for sure. You know, I remember not that long ago we were on for 3 hours, and part of it was like a Texas hour, and we could actually fill a whole hour with Texas stuff, but we won't. We won't do that today, but we have so much before us, so I'm excited.
Certainly, let's, if we can, briefly talk about this idea of supreme coup. Last week we did, even though Kelly was not here. Jeremy did a very good job of talking about joining the coalition. And Kelly, I have put that as our first article, and it's a good illustration of where some people say, well, what can we do? So right under your picture is the link to supremecoup.com, so you don't even have to remember that. You're up to about 60,000 signatures. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's a good start, but we want to get to 1 million. And I really would encourage people out there. I'll tell you a little story that'll hopefully encourage you. Last week, my phone rang, and I saw that it was an area code from Washington, D.C., and wasn't sure who it was. I picked it up, and the voice on the other phone said, "Hi, Kelly, this is Ed Meese."
Wow.
And he said, I read your the letter and the statement that you're sending to the Biden Commission on the Supreme Court. And he said, I think it's really, really excellent. And he said, if it would be okay, I'd like to add my name as a signature.
Okay.
And of course, I was like, that would be an honor. And I said, what would you like me to put under, as your title? And he said, just put former Attorney General of the United States of America.
That works.
So when you sign, this is who you're signing next to. You're so signing next to Franklin Graham. You're signing next to Ed Meese. You're signing next to really heroes, but people who are fighting for our country, and you're just one signature right next to them. And it's easy. It's so easy to do is the thing. If you go to pointofview.net and click on that Supreme Coup, you can click on there, you can add your name. And then the other thing is for you to get other people to do this, because we really need to send, there's a short amount of time we have, and we need to send this message to the commission. This commission is still meeting. They will eventually come up with their recommendation. And if they get this type of a huge response from the American people, it'll make a really big difference. So I would encourage people to make sure you sign, but then also see if you can get a lot of other people. You're probably in groups, and we've made it really easy for you to send things. We've even have memes and stuff. If you look on Supreme Coup, there's a share, and you hit the share, and it's got all these things you can use. Some of them are really funny.
Yes.
But just things you can use to tell your friends and let them know and educate them about this. But we are in a sort of a crucial time period between now and November. when the commission really finishes, and there's really a short amount of time to kind of get things to them so that they can consider those.
Yes. Well, and one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later with Penna Dexter is her piece is about the eviction ban. Just the other day, we had this piece that we posted here that the president is sort of acting like a king, because whether it's the eviction ban or having a national mask mandate, he keeps saying, I know it's probably not constitutional, but that's okay. We're going to certainly try to do it anyway. And so if you think it's bad now, just imagine what would happen, Kelly, if he could put all of his favorite people on the Supreme Court and say, oh, yeah, that's all constitutional.
Yeah, well, that would be scary, wouldn't it? But, I think just with regard to this particular issue, Kelly, the court packing, it's also added to that, as you guys have made clear, it's the reforming of the court and calling it something like judicial review and, banning that and things like that. So the court packing idea, some people will say to you, well, that's not going to happen. But it could happen. And, they are right now feeling their oats, and they are succeeding in doing some very unconstitutional things. So it's a real true threat. And I think, we all have to weigh in on it.
Well, there's a commission that's been formed by the president that's meeting with 36, scholars, very left-wing scholars, but scholars.
There was no conservatives placed on the commission.
There was like, I think 3 that were maybe somewhat conservative, kind of. There's 1 at least, but it was obvious what's going on here.
Yes.
But, not only did that happen, though, a bill was filed. I mean, this is not like a theory. A bill is filed and has been moving to add 4 justices to the Supreme Court. Another bill was just filed last week to add 203
right.
judges to the lower courts. So you talk about, and again, I've described this before, but some people think, oh, yeah, there's more conservative judges, so let's add some liberal judges. That's not what happens when you do this. When you pack the courts, when you add seats, not fill seats, you add seats to get to the political results you wish to get to, your courts are done. And every other country where they've done this, the court is now underneath the political branch. The rule of law is over. Your rights are over. You get whatever rights the power decides to allow you to have, whether that's a president. They did this in Venezuela. They did this in Argentina. I mean, we've got all kinds of history on the SupremeCourt.com. So this is not like a political play. That's what people might think. This is a change the country forever play, and really destroying the thing that is so special about America, which is the rule of law in our Supreme Court. And it's very dangerous. And it's not like something that is a theoretical. It's being attempted right now. There are bills to do this. There's a commission created by the president. And so it really is a time for people to speak up.
Yeah, I agree. And y'all make it very easy at supremecoup.org. Is it org or com?
.com.
Okay, supremecoup.com.
And for those of you who don't know French, coup is COUP.
Yes.
And the good news is we have it right under Kelly's picture. And since we're coming to a break, Penna, we'll just give Kelly a break. But when we come back, want to talk about Keisha Russell, who's been on the program as well. That's where you're going to find that story about the bill that wanted to add an additional 200 federal judges. But the other day, she was on FirstLibertyLive.com. So here's another link that we have there as well. And it answers, I think, in a very systematic way, what about if our child or your children or your grandchildren have to get the vaccine to attend school? What about mask mandates? What about vaccines? I thought she did a very good presentation, but we also have the summary of some of her material. And since Keisha is not only quite bright, but also a former teacher, I thought she just did an outstanding job. So we're going to talk about that after the break. And if you would like to follow some of that, we have those articles. And also the Supreme Court, basically through Amy Coney Barrett, decided not to involve themselves with this vaccine mandate at Indiana University. So there are just a couple of other issues to talk about before we move on to other topics. So if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Both liberals and conservatives believe in free speech. The radical left used to pretend to believe in free speech, but no longer. One example is a bill proposed by two Democratic senators that would allow the federal government to punish big tech companies for not censoring more views. If you already think that big tech censors too much, imagine what would happen if this bill became law. The argument rests on the idea that too much misinformation is being spread on the internet. The bill would establish what sounds like a ministry of truth described in George Orwell's book 1984. It would determine what is approved medical science and what is not. Mario Loyola reminds us that in the past, public safety has been used as a justification for persecuting political opponents. Often the misinformation label, he says, is a rhetorical trick employed for its value as a political weapon rather than a signifier. It can be used to proclaim obvious falsehoods while suppressing their political adversaries' right to speak obvious truths. Over the last year, we have discovered that truth isn't as settled as experts would like for us to think that it is. We've had conflicting statements about the effectiveness of masks, questions about the safety of Johnson & Johnson vaccine, along with dogmatic statements that the virus surely did not come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Once you allow government officials to censor information about medicine and public health, it is merely a small step to allow those same officials to censor opinions and information on topics like sexual orientation and critical race theory. At a time when most of us believe that big tech is censoring too much, there are those on the left who believe that they must censor even more. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, certainly one of the questions that I would suspect a lot of you have is, what about these mask mandates? What about vaccine mandates and the rest? And since the school year has begun for many, began this week for many of us here in the state of Texas, although I know some of you that live in the Northwest or the Northeast, your school doesn't start till after Labor Day, which seems a lot better. But anyway, school is starting or has already started, and you wonder all sorts of questions about your children and the requirements. And so, Penna, you and I had a chance to watch the first Liberty Live, which I do commend to people. Such great material. And our friend Keisha Russell was on there. I think she did an excellent job.
She did. And, you know, this is a national show, and I'm just looking right now because, as you mentioned, Kerby, at Texas, where we're sitting, many schools have already started. It's pretty early, and they started pretty early in the month of August. And so you have that. So the issues are starting to come up. And the governor of Texas, and I think this happened in Florida, and I don't know if it's happened anywhere else, has said you cannot require, all entities across the state cannot require masks in their public entities, to all government officials and schools and all of that. You can't. Well, people are fighting about that, and they're going back and forth now, and they have different views on it. And so that was why it was really good to hear Keisha Russell do First Liberty Live yesterday and talk about what you do and what you can't do. And so, the first question she answers was, will my child be required to get the COVID-19 vaccine to attend school in the fall? And the state says you're not supposed to require that, but some schools are requiring it. So, what you have to do then, of course, is to get some kind of an exemption to that. And so she kind of walks people through how to do that one way. You can do it fairly easily. So you don't even need anybody to walk you through a lot of times because First Liberty has sort of prepared the way. And the other question is, could they require the COVID-19 vaccine in the future? Let's hope that this doesn't come down from on high, but it could, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just appreciated her being there to lead people along the way, and it's not necessarily that you need an attorney to walk you through it. You actually have some rights that you can go ahead and take advantage of right now with your kids going back to school.
Yeah, and I think sort of the subject's a little broad, right? Which is, as parents, what rights do you have over your children? The answer is, in this country, you have the most fundamental constitutional rights to direct the upbringing and education of your children. Our children are not children of the state. They're children of the parents. So as much as the school district or the school might think it has authority, it does not. You have the authority over your children. Now, does that mean you can change the curriculum for the school? No. So you might object to something they're doing. You might pull your child out. You might, but to change a curriculum like CRT or whatever, you need to get involved in your school board. You need to run for school board. You need to get people to vote for the right people. But as far as your own children, you have the control. So nobody can come in and put something into your children without your authority. And so this is important that parents be reminded that they are the authority in this time when people are trying to push things on their kids. And then in addition to that, as Penna was mentioning, pretty much everywhere, and even adults all over the country, people who are being forced to have vaccines, there's almost always a religious exemption. And I don't just mean against the government. I mean in private employment. We have a federal law called Title VII that protects people in the workplace, not only from religious discrimination, but it requires employers to accommodate the religion of their employees if they can do so. Mm-hmm. And so there is, pretty much everywhere. I mean, if you look, if you ask, if you'll find there is an exemption. So now, fortunately for us, on staff, we have the two past attorneys in a row who were the head at HHS of all religious and conscience objections. They know all the rules and stuff, and so they can they provided all those types of things. So if anybody has any questions, and it really has been heartening to hear the stories. I mean, I think we've had over 500. Wow. I know it's been over 500 in the last week requests for help, but the stories I'm hearing of people calling back and saying and weeping and saying, "Thank you, you saved my career. My career was over." People who are in their last year of med school, people who, you just name the story, just really horrible situations where they were going to really have their whole future savaged, that now they're fine. And again, this country is built on religious freedom, so people that have those objections, they're protected. Now, some people are like, I don't know how to write this. Do I have to get my pastor to, send a note? And no, you don't. This is one of those things like, what if you're Catholic? Well, the Pope said he thought it was just fine to take the vaccine. So now you go in and they say, well, sorry, if you're Catholic, you can't. That's not how it works in America. In America, you don't have to have some pastor or some leader or some denomination agree with your beliefs. You can disagree with your own denomination. You can disagree with your own pastor. The issue is your religious beliefs. And so it's just a matter of properly, filing for your exemption or whatever. And again, the laws are there to protect, and all the companies, even private companies, realize that.
So since it's overwhelming right now, people calling you all. So is there paperwork that people can get at First Liberty to help them? For instance, it's good to put your request for an exemption in writing. Yes. And is there some paperwork that people can get, or do they just make up something?
And we've got sampled different things. So if they go to the website at firstliberty.org, you can ask for requests. You can request help. And that's when people are doing this. They're going there, they're filling out, here's my problem, here's my situation. that way they can get the right information. And so I would just encourage people, if they need help or have questions, go to firstliberty.org and seek assistance.
On the vaccine, it's still experimental. So children cannot be required to have the vaccine to go to school.
Right.
But across the nation, we're seeing college students being required at their universities to get the vaccine. And, I know we had Lori Roman on from American Civil Rights Union about it. They're fighting that at various universities, but it's very hard to fight. It's very hard to go against the college and keep them from asking for the vaccine, or at least requiring their students to have it. But there's always a possibility for an exemption, again, as Kelly said. So people need to apply for those. You can't really stand up against the college. I mean, maybe some people can band together and do that, but it was not successful at the Supreme Court this week. So it's a matter of getting your exemption.
Let me just mention that is, again, Justice Amy Coney Barrett yesterday rejected a plea from the group at Indiana University to stop the university's requirement that all students be vaccinated. So basically the way it runs right now is the Supreme Court is not going to step in and say that is unconstitutional. And so you're going to have to consider something else. And that, Kelly, is exactly why you have all this good information. Even the material we've posted here, if you go to the second page, you will see a whole section on how can I request a religious exemption. So you certainly could call First Liberty, but I think everything you need is right there on the website.
Yeah, it's should be really easy. And let me mention something, because we talked about Amy Coney Barrett.
Yes.
I've seen lots of posts and things about how Amy Coney Barrett, is approving vaccines and all this. Look, this reached the Supreme Court in what's an emergency motion.
Yeah.
They're never granted, almost never, very rare. And this one was, so not in the possibility of being taken that they didn't even poll the court. So don't attribute, when the court doesn't take a case or they don't rule on an emergency motion, people always try to attribute, to them, well, they're doing this or they're doing that. They're really not speaking to the merits at all. You don't know. Amy Coney Barrett could be very anti-vaccination, and she could be waiting for the right facts. Mm-hmm. This might be the best facts. There might be better cases down that are coming up that are going to give. So I just encourage people not to start immediately going, woe is me. We picked, these Amy Coney Barrett's a horrible justice. She's for, taking away freedom. You just can't guess either way based
because
upon these things.
Because universities would be able to say that if she ruled the other way. Universities would be saying, what is the Supreme Court doing, coming down on our rights to protect our students?
Yeah.
And it's just too much to guess. When they don't take a case or they don't issue something on an emergency, the chances are so minuscule that to attribute some sort of merits or that they're taking a position, that I think that goes way too far on these.
You might even say, why did she weigh in? Well, it's because the Seventh Circuit, and that's one that she has the jurisdiction over. So, well, we'll explain a little bit more about the Supreme Court in a minute, but we need to take a break. By the way, if you do have a question, 1-800-351-1212. Otherwise, we're going to move on to some other topics right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford in studio with us today. We're going to move on in just a few minutes, take some other phone calls. But before we do, I do want to at least acknowledge the mixed signals that we get. In just a minute, I'm going to have Penna kind of cover the article we have that is I think it's the last article, but if you scroll down, it is, I think, the best review of do masks work. But even before we get to the mask one, I thought, talk about mixed signals. We were able to put this together on just the whole issue of boosters. We've been hearing about whether or not we need a Pfizer booster, and we talked about that the other day. So 9 days ago, the World Health Organization called for halting the use of COVID vaccine boosters. The argument is we aren't getting enough vaccines out to everybody. I gave the number of only 15% of the world has even had access to the vaccines. Then about a couple of weeks ago, you'd already had the Israeli Minister of Health announcing that because of the decline in effectiveness of some of the vaccines, they wanted to go ahead with the booster. Then you have, and these aren't necessarily completely in order here, then the pronouncements from the CDC and the FDA now saying Americans who have been fully vaccinated do not need a booster at this time. But then Pfizer Pharmaceuticals say, based on the totality of the data we have right now, we believe that they do need a third booster because, of course, the Pfizer vaccine seems to be much less effective against the so-called Delta variant. And then they're all saying, well, this would be helpful within 6 to 12 months. Keep in mind that the first Americans vaccinated were in mid-December. Well, I know that the president said nobody was vaccinated till he was president, but we have him on video being vaccinated on December 21st. So I think you've got, Penna, almost every possible statement made over the last approximately 4 to 6 weeks about boosters. And I understand why people are rather confused because it's mixed messages, aren't they?
It's just the same thing, excuse me, as with masks. We heard all different sides of it. It just wasn't in 4 to 6 weeks. It took a few more months to confuse us thoroughly on masks. But now we have this whole booster idea. And of course, I mean, it has been a little bit of a shock to the system when millions of Americans got vaccines. And now we're seeing all kinds of Americans get I guess they're getting the Delta variant. You don't know for sure if you get the Delta variant. You just know you get COVID, and then some people will get genome tests.
I'd like to see studies. I haven't looked at this, and I don't know if anybody's done anything on it yet, but I'd like to know the sort of percentages of the people who are getting this Delta variant. At first we heard it was all the unvaccinated, but everybody I know who has it is vaccinated. I mean, and so I'm wondering, is there a difference in, here's what I'd love to see. I'd love to see some sort of analysis of the people who now have just gotten COVID in the last, 4 weeks. What percentage of those people, like if you took the people who are vaccinated, what percentage of those people got the variant? If you took the people who were unvaccinated and had no immunities, they didn't have COVID before, what was their percentage? And then I'd like to know what the percentage of the people who didn't get vaccinated but had COVID. I mean, my guess would be that by far the people who had COVID and aren't vaccinated would probably be the number one people who did not get it. But I would love to see those things and see, is there a difference? What if it was weird and it came back that it was people who were being vaccinated that were getting it more?
Some people have said that.
And I mean, you would think these would be the things we'd be looking at right now. And yet, for some reason, we never get the information that's really helpful. We get kind of bizarre information. We get like that, well, we studied these, 200 people that went to a crazy party in Cape Cod, and we're gonna base everything in the country off of that. I mean, it's been really odd to watch the so-called science that we've been following, and that really we haven't even been following. So I think there would be some really good information. I mean, John Hopkins usually does a good job of putting some information, but So I don't know if anybody's following this, but I'm really interested, and I'm continually frustrated that they treat this like there's two classes as far as of Americans to look at, when really there's three. It's not unvaccinated and vaccinated. It's vaccinated. It's unvaccinated who haven't had it, so they don't have any immunities. And then there's the people who are unvaccinated who have had COVID and therefore have immunities. Looking at those three, I think, would be really helpful to know how things are going and what's the best defense and all those types of things.
And then they want to tax the unvaccinated.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Tax the unvaccinated. That, I think, would be the most valuable information you could get.
I think so.
Because, they've been really recommending to people that have had COVID to go ahead and get the vaccine for safety's sake. But I did hear one doctor in Texas, he's at Baylor, and he testified before the Texas Senate. I don't know when this was, but I saw the testimony yesterday. And he said that it's actually not medically good to recommend to these people who have already had it to have the vaccine too. They're really best off if they just allow they're broadly immune if they've had COVID. And so, I remember when my dad had COVID, and then I tried to talk him out of having the vaccine. I wasn't successful in doing so because I was worried about that mix. And now, because people are getting COVID, the Delta variant or some kind of COVID after being vaccinated in such greater and greater numbers, we're hearing it now. Because of that, I hope that they do study that very thing to see that, the millions of people that have had it, leave them alone. Let them enjoy their antibodies and enjoy their good health.
And the other thing is, we know, everybody admits, no matter what side they're on, that taking a vaccination, there are some risk, even if they're low. Why would you add risk when they don't do anything for you? It doesn't make any sense. So those are things that we should know. And we all know, I at least know, everybody knows somebody who's been vaccinated and then something happened. Sometimes it's like obviously short things like, right, the stiff arm or whatever. But we also know, at least I do. I know people who never had a heart issue in their life, and 2 months later, a month later, heart attack. So there are things happening that you just don't know for sure. And so why would you want to increase your risk if you already have immunity? And the studies show that immunity is working better than if you're vaccinated. Because the studies do show that. If you look at
Seem to, yeah.
And that stands to reason.
Of course it does, yeah. I'm just going to keep it moving because one of the articles we mentioned, Penna, is Do Masks Work? People have gone back and forth on this, and this one put together by Jeffrey Anderson, who is really good at collecting statistics, is probably the most thorough situation I've seen. And here's a good example, Kelly, of why maybe we don't necessarily have all the studies, because when the other day the senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul, posted some of this kind of information, which makes me wonder now whether we'll be on YouTube tomorrow. When he just posted this information, they said, well, that doesn't follow government policy. And I love what one wag said. Last time we checked, Rand Paul is part of the government, but he was actually suspended for putting this information together. So we're taking a risk, but you can find what I think is a very good article, Penna. You've had a chance to read all the way through it and mark it up, because if people want to know, do masks really work? This really kind of gives you the whole looking at the kind of masks that work and the fact that most of them really don't.
Well, I think I won't give you the conclusion right away, but I will say that the best kind of studies, and this is known in the medical community, are randomized controlled trials. And we don't have randomized controlled trials on COVID, but we do on other kinds of infections and flus and viruses. And so this article takes you through and lets you see some of these studies that have been done using masks. And really the bottom line to it is that masks, especially when you put that with hand washing helps. But if you put hand washing with masks, it actually doesn't help. And, I don't know why that is, but it shows that the masks that we're all wearing, the N95 might offer some protection according to some of these studies, but very little. And the other masks offer nothing. They are just basically worthless. I'm not saying that that's what I think. I'm saying that that's what these studies show. And if you read this article, you can make your own determination on what you think about this. But I think you'll be thinking about masks. And that's why, especially when I see schools all over the country beginning to require children to wear masks again, because I know I have a lot of grandchildren and their moms are like, we're in Texas, so it's not required, but they're worried that their kids will be required to wear masks again because it wasn't good. I mean, especially if a child has a little asthma or they have allergies and their lungs are just developing. They're still little kids. It's just not, it wasn't good. And they were glad when it went away, and they do not want to see it come back.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, get into some other topics in the news. Hope this has been a good coverage of some of those topics. We will come back with more right after this.
When Congress passed a moratorium on evictions back in March 2020, it all seemed a little backwards and unfair to landlords. Lawmakers' provision for renters' lockdown job losses seemed compassionate, but has proved to be misguided. The eviction moratorium provided protection for renters of government-subsidized housing who got behind on their rent. Their landlords would have to wait for payment until COVID-19 relief dollars passed through what turned out to be complex and unreliable state and local channels. To date, of the $47 billion appropriated for rental relief, only $3 billion has been dispersed to renters. Yet their landlords have had to cover mortgages, property taxes, insurance, utilities, and repair bills. The eviction moratorium expired in July 2020. In September, the Centers for Disease Control stepped in as what columnist George Will calls a supplemental legislature and declared a ban on evictions from any rental housing for non-payment by individuals making under $99,000 annually and couples making up to $198,000 who claimed pandemic-related financial injury. By June of this year, landlords were owed $27.5 billion in unpaid rents. The burden on many landlords is becoming unbearable. George Will points out that most are not wealthy. Nearly half own only 1 or 2 units. During the early days of the pandemic, a moratorium on evictions may have seemed like an efficient way to help people who lost income due to lockdowns, but it wasn't. When a solution to a humanitarian problem sounds like socialism, it probably is. Many landlords are forced into carrying renters who have little incentive to apply for relief. A majority of Supreme Court justices agree the moratorium is lawless, but Justice Kavanaugh allowed the taking to continue to its July 31st expiration. Since Congress refused to act on the moratorium, the CDC extended it. Congress is too scared to pass a law protecting private property. While the Biden administration maintains this lawless moratorium, the stealing continues. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Got a lot of topics on the table, but Stephen in Georgia wanted to put one more on the table. So, Stephen, thank you for joining us today.
I want to change the subject a little bit to foreign policy. I was kind of wondering the take on your panel today on what's happening in Afghanistan with the Taliban, and because of our open borders that are continuing to be on the increase, do we see eventually they're turning their attention again to the United States with what's going on here?
2 points. First of all, of course, the Taliban, especially in the northern part, have pretty much taken over and driven people out. So there are a lot of us around the table, and well, I speak for myself. I better not speak for anybody else, but it does remind us, at least those of us that are older, of when we were sending people out of Vietnam and be the last one on the helicopter. And that's a concern because we do have a number of allies there in Afghanistan that were translators and had cooperated with the government. And once you decide to pull out, you know that the Taliban's going to take over, and that's tragic. But then again, what about open borders? Because anybody that thinks the only people crossing our borders right now are those who speak Spanish haven't been talking to some of the border control people, because there are people and backpacks that illustrate that a good number of these people come from the Middle East, and that's a security issue as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's an issue. Afghanistan's a tough issue. It's one of those things that, what the Soviet Union was in there for years, and everybody who's been in there to try to get things under control, it doesn't work. Herding cats is kind of an image. So you go in there, you try to do good, you try to stop that from being a launching point for bad things, against us and other countries. But there's really no solution over there. So, and then you're risking your own people. Your own people are dying. So I think that you've got a lot of people that are frustrated that we were in there so long, that lives were lost, and we're leaving, and now they're watching it all completely go to waste. But then you've got, I think, the very good argument that why are we in there? Because it's not going to succeed, and we don't want to stay there forever. That's not the idea. So I think a lot of people are kind of say, if there's no exit plan, there's no solution, then why are we there? Why are we risking lives of our folks? So I think you've got mixed feelings, but I bet most Americans, I haven't seen a poll, I bet most Americans probably think we should be out of there.
I think this is involve a lot deeper dive into the whole issue, but just on the top of it, I really was a little disturbed even when President Trump wanted to take everyone out, and then when Biden actually did do it. I think if it had been Trump, I don't think the foreign policy apparatus would have let us do such a quick and complete pullout that we did, because it is true that we were never winning in Afghanistan, but the Taliban was under much better control, and they weren't really pulling the mischief in recent years that they had been before. So, I mean, we keep troops in certain places in the world. I always thought that if we kept a contingent of a certain level there, that it just might have to be something that we do, and that it would be a force for stability in the Middle East. I know we have other bases, but I think this kind of shows that kind of thinking might be right, because this has happened so quickly. Now, the Biden administration could put as many as 8,000 more people back in, 3,000 to facilitate the removal of American citizens from Kabul. And then there are also people applying for visas, so there'll be 1,000 to process those. And then they're saying perhaps 3,500 more as a quick reaction force if needed. And, I'm guessing it probably will be needed. So, I just wonder if it all happened a little bit too fast, and maybe just we could have left more people there as, just to help with the security in the situation. I think of the people that I know that serve there, and they're looking at everything they did just going away.
Yes. Kelly asked a good question about can we even grow, as I've said before, a democracy or republic on Muslim soil?
Probably not.
I'm holding up my Islam booklet, because if you get into that, the assumption of a democracy, of course we have a republic here, but whatever that might be, is an assumption of equal justice under the law. But if you're a Muslim, I hate to say it, Penna, but women do not have the same rights in a country that believes in Sharia law as that. Matter of fact, our Sharia law booklet probably would be a better one to hold up there. The same thing, there are a different view in terms of equal justice, in terms of the difference between Muslims and non-Muslims. And so there needs to be almost, if you will, a cultural change in order to really establish a permanent democratic society. And that has been the challenge, whether you look at Iran, whether you look at Iraq, whether you look at Syria, or in this case, whether you look at Afghanistan. And that's a real challenge that I just think was maybe a mistake made by the Bush administration, because the president at that time, President George W. Bush, said, everybody desires freedom. Everybody desires equality. No, not necessarily. And that's the difference between a Christian view, which is the foundation upon which our government is resting, and a Muslim view, which is very, very different.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this idea of sort of transporting democracy into these other cultures, it's kind of a Bush thing. And I think
neocon.
Yeah, and I think most people realize it doesn't actually work. You wish it could work. You wish, it would be a better society, but especially in the Middle Eastern countries and these places. I mean, the Taliban and Afghanistan is about as bad as you get. I mean, that's been going on for a long time, and nobody's ever had any success there. But I think it's just as hard if you tried to go do that in any of the other countries around there. I think the Islamic countries are just not there. It goes against everything they're about to have, a democracy type government. There's sort of rare, hybrids a little bit. Like I would think of maybe Turkey, but otherwise, I just don't think that works over there.
Even with Turkey, when you had, of course, the previous focus there with Ataturk, it was really focused on the idea of democracy and kind of a Western view, and they even became part of NATO. But now under Erdogan, you're kind of going all the way back to the fundamentalist kind of idea.
And he was a little bit more of a capitalist when he first started, and he's become now more kind of radical.
So, again, I think we've oftentimes said this, but maybe it gets back to one of the arguments that there's a clash of civilization between the Western Christian world and the Muslim world. I don't want to overplay that, but it's something we've seen in many of these countries.
In Afghanistan, I read this today, that Taliban fighters are going and they're forcing marriages between conquered citizens with these fighters. So they're forcing marriages and all. There have been some gains in Afghanistan with regard to education for women and things like that. So those will be gone.
Yes. And when the Taliban controlled before, you couldn't even fly a kite, much less educate women. So, I mean, if you want to talk about the most brutal regime, that one certainly would be the case. But, Stephen, you ask a good question. I wish I had a better answer, but we may cover some of that next week and bring a few foreign policy experts on. But when we come back from the break, I just wanted to go around the round table quickly, because one of the articles is by our good friend Dinesh D'Souza. If the sky is falling, give us a call when it actually happens. And it brings us back to the fact that every time we turn around to the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they're saying it's doom and gloom. To be fair, for those of us that have read the 41-page executive summary, it isn't quite the doom and gloom that the media creates, but we've been down this road a few times before, so we might talk about that. I also have one here, the hard bigotry of no expectations. George W. Bush used to talk about the soft bigotry of no expectation, of low expectations. Now they don't even want to test the kids in school. I cannot make this stuff up, so we'll continue to talk about some of those issues right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Just before I take another phone call, then we move on to some of the other topics. Just as a program note, I thought I would mention that next week we have Josh McDowell with us, and we're going to be talking about this new book that he has co-authored with one of the individuals in the Josh McDowell ministry. I think you're going to find that very helpful. Also, we're going to be playing the interview we did with Dallas Jenkins and The Chosen, so I thought you might want to hear that. And while I'm talking about movies, although it's really more of a television program, we from time to time like to promote movies, and I thought I would just mention, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but there is a new movie coming out called Respect. It's based on the career of Aretha Franklin, and it really takes the story of singing in her father's church choir, some of her faith-based experiences and things like that. I thought you might really appreciate that, and sometimes we're looking for, Penna Dexter, some of these movies we can take our kids to. I think this is going to be certainly the case. Jennifer Hudson stars as Aretha Franklin.
Wow.
It's a biopic, and just thought I might mention that. We sometimes actually do interviews with some of the people on those movies, but from time to time I always like to mention a movie that is kind of family-affirming, faith-affirming. That seems to be...
So this is all next week?
Yes.
All of these.
Matter of fact, you'll probably catch it again.
You've got some fun guests next week with Josh McDowell coming in. That ought to be a lot of fun.
So we'll have fun with that, but let me take a phone call left over from the last hour. We'll go to Arizona, KNLB. And James, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, Kerby, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, go ahead.
So, the problem with the Bush Doctrine, there's actually two problems with the Bush Doctrine. Number one, you cannot give freedom to people who do not value it.
Well said.
You cannot impose an American system of government on a country that has a culture that is different from us. Afghanistan is very tribal, and it won't work. The other reason that the Bush Doctrine did not work in Afghanistan is that they have to figure out what time is first.
Yeah, you're really dealing with a lot of cultural issues, and when people say, "Well, why can't we export democracy?" I wish we could, but just look at how long it took, even in Western culture, to begin to have this idea of individual rights, of natural rights, of equal protection under the law. So many things we today take for granted, none of which are foundational issues in many of these Muslim countries. Now, does that mean we can never export democracy to those countries? No, but I do believe that sometimes there is a cultural revolution that needs to take place before you can even establish the kind of stability. So you're right on target. And again,
and
go ahead.
The thing is that I served in Afghanistan, and people think that I'm crazy when I talk about what it's like over there. Because the average life expectancy of an adult male in the United States is what, 74, 75?
Something like that, yes.
You know what it is? You know what it is in Afghanistan?
30-something, isn't it? But
58.
Tell me what. Yeah.
58.
Oh, yeah. Okay, it's higher than I thought it was.
That's
I wasn't sure.
Are they killed in battle?
No, they don't know how old they are.
That's the other thing.
So that's why you said they really don't know what time it is.
Yes.
Yeah, you get outside of Kabul, or Jalalabad, you would think you stepped into an episode of the Flintstones.
Yeah. It's just a different world. James, I appreciate, first of all, your service in that country, and I appreciate your service in the military, and it's just a good illustration of one of the reasons why, even though we supported President Bush, we just think that the so-called Bush doctrine didn't make a great deal of sense, and I'm thinking that that's exactly what we are finding out happening right now.
I think so. I just still maintain this was done so quickly when we were there so long. They depended on us for certain things, and so I just question the way this happened. I really do. I question our foreign policy apparatus in doing it this way.
I thought maybe I would go right now to Mary in Georgia, because she broadens it a little bit, because it also relates, I think, what Mary's going to talk about, to Penna Dexter's commentary, which is today, as well as the piece that I posted just the other day, which Joe Biden is talking like a king. So, Mary, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, I keep hearing that the things that Biden is doing are illegal, like not finishing the border wall, which was already paid for, letting drugs and criminals come across the border, and then extending this eviction moratorium. So if indeed these things are illegal, why aren't we doing something about it? They tried to impeach Trump for breathing every other day. So why, if these things truly are illegal, what are we doing about it?
And Penna, your commentary is about the eviction ban, and what I keep seeing is almost every time we turn around, the president says, well, for example, we're kind of checking on that. Or the other day on, do I have the authority to impose a national mask mandate? Well, I don't believe that so far, but we're checking on that. I'd like to explain, Mr. President, we have a thing called the Constitution, and we have certain enumerated powers that are given to the federal government, and the rest are reserved to what? The states and the people. So you don't have a right to extend a moratorium on the eviction ban, which you've written about, and we don't have the authority that the president can actually go out there and do all the other things that this president's been doing.
He doesn't have the right to have a moratorium on evictions. I have to say that it was done under President Trump first, but it was done for subsidized housing, and it expired, and then it was extended not by the Congress. The first one was done by Congress, but by the CDC. So, and it's unconstitutional. He admitted it's unconstitutional. And that's what is worrisome, that they have so little regard for the Constitution in so many areas. And this one makes me very upset because it's so brazen, and because they use the compassion for the renters across the country that may have lost income through COVID. But really, it's gone so far beyond that now, because the other half of this equation is the people that own the apartments and the rental units. Most of them, 53% is the stat, own like just 2 units, maybe 1 or 2 units. And they're not wealthy people. A lot of times it's their livelihood, or it's just a very small part of their, it's actually a large part of their income. They depend on it. And so when they're having to pay everything, they've got to pay the mortgage, they've got to pay all repairs, property taxes, and just keep the people that are paying their rent happy with how things are working in their apartments and their rental units. So it's not fair to them, and they're the ones that are suffering now. And so, it's interesting because in New York, the Supreme Court actually just struck down one of these, a part of one of these these eviction moratoriums. So I think that says something for what could happen if this is challenged again. And it should be, because this is now a unilateral decree by the president, and it's widely unconstitutional.
You can find out more of that on Penna Dexter's commentary, which we posted today on the eviction ban. And I want to hear from Kelly Shackelford about the constitutionality of it right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Both liberals and conservatives believe in free speech. The radical left used to pretend to believe in free speech, but no longer. One example is a bill proposed by 2 Democratic senators that would allow the federal government to punish big tech companies for not censoring more views. If you already think that big tech censors too much, imagine what would happen if this bill became law. The argument rests on the idea that too much misinformation is being spread on the internet. The bill would establish what sounds like a ministry of truth described in George Orwell's book 1984. It would determine what is approved medical science and what is not. Mario Loyola reminds us that in the past, public safety has been used as a justification for persecuting political opponents. Often the misinformation label, he says, is a rhetorical trick employed for its value as a political weapon rather than a signifier. It can be used to proclaim obvious falsehoods while suppressing their political adversaries' right to speak obvious truths. Over the last year, we have discovered that truth isn't as settled as experts would like for us to think that it is. We've had conflicting statements about the effectiveness of masks, questions about the safety of Johnson & Johnson vaccine, along with dogmatic statements that the virus surely did not come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Once you allow government officials to censor information about medicine and public health, it is merely a small step to allow those same officials to censor opinions and information on topics like sexual orientation and critical race theory. At a time when most of us believe that big tech is censoring too much, there are those on the left who believe that they must censor even more. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we are going to focus a little bit on the constitutionality, but just before we do so, I thought, Penn, let me come back to you because, again, if people would like to get some of this information, it is the Viewpoints commentary. If you sign up to get our commentaries, you'll receive hers tomorrow in your inbox, but you can go to it right now. And in addition to the fact that this is hurting some of these mom and pop landlords, also, the money that was supposed to go for rent relief hasn't really been distributed, has it?
No, that's what Congress did do. In 2 different tranches, they have actually put out there $47 billion appropriated for rental relief, and it hasn't reached, for the most part, only about $3 billion has reached the renters to pay the landlords. And so there's a lot of fault with regard to that. It's out in cities and states, and it hasn't been well distributed. It wasn't done in an organized manner or something. And then the other side of that is renters have to file paperwork to receive it. And some renters don't have really an incentive to do it because they've had their rent. There's a moratorium. They don't have to pay their rent. And so it's a bad situation. It shouldn't have been done this way. It was done wrong because it provides bad socialist type incentives. And, you know, if you look at the next bill, the $3.5 trillion bill, there are many of those in there. There is a push in this country for the government to be all things to all people, to provide everything for everybody. And the only people that will pay for it are the wealthy people through their taxes and also be borrowing it. So, I mean, this is just one really egregious example of that. And I think Kelly, I mentioned it's unconstitutional, but Kelly, I think you need to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the government can't take over people's property, which is what they're trying to do here. And this went to the Supreme Court, and basically the Supreme Court said this is unconstitutional. But then Justice Kavanaugh said, you know, since the time limit's about over, we'll wait. I don't think you should do that, but that's the conservative side. You know, people sometimes conservative get frustrated, but that's the conservative side of Brett Kavanaugh. He's like, don't rule unless you really have to rule, kind of a thing. And that's the one of the things that frustrates conservatives about Justice Kavanaugh. But so we'll see. I think what happened is Biden was virtue signaling to people,
yes,
for political reasons. He knows it's unconstitutional. When it's struck down, which it will be, he wants people to know that he knew it was going to be struck down, but he still wants the benefit of trying to give free goodies to, people. So this is his way to kind of try to get his political benefit. I will say on the caller's question, though, the other part of this is different. The evictions is the president acting unconstitutionally. And again, I think it's sad that we're to a point where a president would think that they're going to gain political advantage by doing something they know is unconstitutional. It should be that when any president does something they know is unconstitutional, the country should react with, it should be a very big negative for you, even if you think it's good. But the other issue is not something that was unconstitutional, and that is he's not taking care of the border. The Constitution gives the authority to the federal government over the border. So it is in the hands of the president and Congress to take care of that. But it's not like there's a law telling the president how to take care of the border. So what he's doing there is just malfeasance. It's irresponsibility, but it's not unconstitutional. And so, I mean, the one of the best things I've heard recently was I heard Governor DeSantis say, he seems to be obsessed with Florida and Texas and wearing masks, when he should be paying attention to the border. He should be paying attention to the inflation that's starting, the energy prices, everything that's going up as he's printing all this paper money that's leading to already what could be worse and worse and worse over time. And so this is just something, the border is just something he's done a horrible job of taking care of. And the sad thing is President Trump struggled with the border. He was trying to have control of the border, and he had problems. And, he was criticized and all that, but he actually found a solution. I mean, he actually kind of, and I thought it was brilliant. No other president had thought of it, which is, we'll go and threaten the countries that are down there that are doing nothing about these people coming through their borders to get to our border. And, they're getting money from us. So all of a sudden we got cooperation, and the border really did get under control. And then Biden came in and just, flittered all that away. And I understand it's because of the politics of this sort of open border approach, but it's an absolute disaster.
2 million and counting.
2 million is what they count.
That's all they're counting.
I mean,
and it's probably a lot more.
It's probably 4 million.
Yeah, it could be.
And they're just flooding into our country at a time when we're trying to keep COVID down. In a time when, these people are coming from not just Mexico they're coming from other countries, Middle Eastern, et cetera. So this is just really a horrible, this is really, negligence is an understatement. As the president, if you can't protect your own borders, I think that's kind of a basic thing. And he's not doing it. And they know that this is a crisis and a disaster, and they still won't correct it because of politics. And so that's just being a bad president, but that's not unconstitutional.
They know also that they're letting lots of people in that are COVID positive, and yet he's focusing on masks and vaccine mandates for American citizens who live all over the country, kids going to school, things like that. And so, that that in itself says, it's got its priorities a little bit mixed
when they come in, he's providing airplanes and filling them up with these people that have COVID,
putting
and
COVID positive people on planes and flying them to other places.
I can't think of a worse idea, but that's what's happening.
Let's see if we can take one phone call that maybe Penna can answer. If nothing else, Phil in Ohio, you've got another thought about that issue of the eviction moratorium. So go ahead.
Hi, Phil.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you there?
We're here.
I'm sorry, I got a car phone here, but my question is for Penna. The CDC and the whole thing with the renters and the tenants. If the tenants or the people that have the homes, if they go into foreclosure and the banks take over the properties, are they allowed to kick the people out? And I'll hang up and I'll let you guys respond, so I'm not keeping you on.
Yeah, because you got two issues. Number one, you've got the renters, which are there sometimes rent-free, but then the landlords are sitting there saying, if I don't pay enough to actually pay my taxes and electricity and those kinds of things, the bank could foreclose on my rental property. And so that's another issue. Well, if they do foreclose, at that point, you would think they probably could kick them out, but then the landlords and the landladies all lose their property. And so
either that or the bank just holds on to it then and leaves for the most part, I don't know what the government's deal is with the banks on this kind of thing.
Yes.
That is a good question. I don't know the answer. I have a feeling that there's some kind of a deal, though, between the government and the banks are probably actually having to eat something too.
Last week, Kelly, you weren't here, but we were talking about this one individual that was not being able to collect rent from individuals, sometimes going all the way back to December. But then when one of the people in the rental property's water heater went out, she hasn't been paying rent for months, but then he was being threatened from the city by fines if he didn't go and fix her water heater, and she hadn't actually been paying rent in months. So it's just the insanity of some of this.
It is. Look, everybody understood at the beginning the government was shutting everybody's businesses down. And so people couldn't work and they couldn't pay for things. And so now I think we found out that all these shutdowns did nothing as far as COVID went.
Yes.
All they did was destroy, people's businesses and their livelihoods and everything else. But we didn't know back then, right? So we'll give them a break on that. But that's why they provided this. Well, people are able to go back to work now. And so, we'd be even better if we had a president that was focusing on that. But people are being able to go back to work. So the idea of continuing this, the time is over. And the CDC does not have the authority over our country. They're not elected and they don't have authority, and the president doesn't have the authority to take people's property. There's a constitutional amendment on that. You cannot take people's property without just compensation if you're the government. We own our property, not the government.
Takings clause. Again, Constitution 101. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We will do that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we still have in studio with us today Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. Of course, we have some of the links to First Liberty we encourage you to get. We have mentioned a couple of things. First of all, on the Supreme Coup, we have, of course, do masks work and the review of that evidence. I thought I would just real quickly mention a few others. One is the IPCC climate report, and that came down this week. Dinesh D'Souza has a very good column. It's the second one. And also, I wanted to go around the round table. Maybe I'll start with this one first. Earlier in the week, we didn't also talked about, of course, the climate change issue, but $1.2 trillion for infrastructure, which now goes to the House. We'll see what happens there. And a $3.5 trillion budget, which also goes to the House. One, which had 69 votes for the infrastructure bill, which means you had 19 Republicans vote for it. The other one, which was 50 to 49 in terms of the budget. But if we keep spending money like this, Penna, I do fear for the future of our children and grandchildren. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the budget resolution followed the infrastructure bill, and it really sets the tone. It's sort of like a blueprint for this $3.5 trillion bill that is all going to be written, and all these different parts of it, like universal preschool and free college and just, all kinds of lovely giveaways. And so, number one, it's $3.5 trillion is a tremendous amount of money, so it's going to be inflationary. Number two, they say that they don't want to print the money, but they want to tax people to pay for it. So that's going to go way down beyond the quote-unquote rich to the middle class. Also, a lot of these programs that they're putting together, they're going to be ongoing. They're going to be entitlements. So it's not going to be a one-time expense. It's going to go on forever. So the next step is going to be committees coming up with all the details of this legislation to be voted on. And the committee's deadline is September 14th. So this is being rushed through. And Nancy Pelosi has said, I'm not going to pass in the House the infrastructure bill unless I also see the Senate pass this monstrosity. Well, good. Don't pass any of it then. That's the way I feel about it.
Yeah. This is, we've already started because of going through the pandemic and all the money we've been basically printing out of the government basement. And people just think it has no impact, people who are foolish. But we know what happens, right? What's coming is massive inflation. Hopefully not back to the Jimmy Carter days, but it sure looks like that's where they're trying to point us. And that's not good at all. That's the value of everything you have is lowering when that happens. And we've already started to see it, right? We're seeing, look at your gas prices from when the administration took over. Look what's happening there. Look at the food prices. Milk, a lot of things are up. There already is inflation starting across the country. And even the Fed, board members have had to, they over and over, oh, no, we don't see any chance. Now they're admitting, okay, well, maybe, So, and if we do this, this is like going to push it on steroids.
Yes.
So it's just a horrible, it's just sad to watch politicians that think they can just spend and spend and spend and give and give and give, and that's going to help them politically, but they have no concern for what they're doing to the country for their children and their grandchildren. It's sad.
This was just really an opportunity to get every progressive policy issue tacked into and sort of squished into one bill, and that's what's happening. For instance, there's already $107 billion in this bill, in this budget, for the Judiciary Committee to decide what to do on a pathway to citizenship. Oh, great. This is the Democrats' dream, is to get all these new Democrat voters into the country. And then I mentioned the universal pre-K, also clean energy and Green New Deal projects. This is like the way to get the Green New Deal. And we'll talk about climate in a minute. But there are just so many. I mean, it's bad how much it costs. It's bad that it's inflationary, and it's all the things that they want to smush into it are bad. They're socialist.
And you're also saying that there was a rush, and I think the rush is in the back of their minds, recognizing that the clock is ticking and the time is running out. Because isn't it fair to say that probably 2 years from now we'll be talking about a Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, not Nancy Pelosi, and a Republican House, if not a Senate, and that really pretty much brings the end to some of this. So they recognize that it's now or never, right?
And really, it's now or a year from now, or even a few months from now, when the midterm elections start gearing up. Democrats, they may be different than Republicans, and there's definitely a divide, but there are many, many Democrats, and there are people in office who aren't this progressive, and they don't want to spend. I mean, a few have said they don't want to spend this much money. And so, they're going to be fighting over it between the Democrats themselves. And the closer the election gets, the more they're going to, worry about those seats in the House, especially that are a little more moderate areas where the people aren't just far to the left.
Yeah, I look at the time period for a lot of things right now. They're trying to do a number of very extreme things. The worst of which is court packing, which would destroy our courts. HR 1, which now they're trying to figure out another way to push through this sort of government takeover, federal government takeover of all the state laws on elections. The Equality Act, which is just an incredibly extreme piece of legislation where it eradicates religious freedom protections for every American under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act whenever an LGBT issue arises. The citizenship or statehood for D.C. and Puerto Rico. I mean, these are things that are just kind of crazy, but they would do it if they could. And they know this, along with this massive spending of let's just give money to everybody that we want to buy votes through. Well, they know they're having to do all this now because when you turn the corner and we're into next year and people are focused on elections, polling on court packing is not the country doesn't want that. The country doesn't want their change of all the election laws. I mean, most of the country's in favor of having IDs before you vote. 70% of African Americans are in favor of it. So you start going down the list of all these things. How many Americans want to spend their children and grandchildren into oblivion? So these are all things that what they're doing is pushing as hard as they can right now, because they know once we get into like January and February and we're focusing on the elections, they're going to have some serious problems. And so I think that's they've said that's the lesson they learned from the Obama administration is they didn't go hard enough, quick enough.
Well, and again, there are some roadblocks, and some of those are on the Democratic side. Of course, we can say Joe Manchin on the Senate, but isn't it interesting that Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to push for a increase in the debt ceiling because she cannot depend on enough Democrats voting for it, and there's not a Republican probably in the House. Well, I shouldn't say that, Nick. That's always Republicans find a way.
A few.
Yeah, but probably not. And so so they didn't add even the increase in the debt ceiling to the $33.5 trillion budget framework. So there are some obvious roadblocks ahead for even the most progressive and even for some of the Democratic leaders, aren't there?
Yeah, we need some bold people out there doing things. Like, for instance, Kelly mentioned HR 1 and how they're trying to morph it a little bit to be acceptable. And Ted Cruz actually was able to stop it Wednesday night. So, we need people like that. There's a few bold ones out there that you can depend on. They need to be, first of all, thanked. But second of all, they need to be told what the people think. And that's why it's important to weigh in on some of these issues that you feel strongly about.
You mean those bold people like those Republicans in the Senate who just voted for the $1 trillion extra?
Well, there are many wimps out there, many wimpy Republicans.
19 anyway that voted for the
That's
infrastructure bill. They all stayed together, the 49 of them, for the other vote. But it just is kind of intriguing. And if nothing else, that's why we see such a push right now. But there are some issues that are going to raise their head pretty quickly because we've already passed the debt ceiling. So right now, what's happening is the Federal Reserve is trying to do what it can to not default on the debt. But once you get to 28 trillion, we've passed that. And so Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, somebody's going to have to do something. And Penna, you mentioned a piece that we should all read in the Wall Street Journal by Kim Strassel on the fact that Chuck Schumer seems to be having Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pulling his strings a little bit.
She's his shadow right now.
Isn't that amazing? Anyway, we got a lot to cover, and we only have one more segment left. We'll do our best right after this.
When Congress passed a moratorium on evictions back in March 2020, it all seemed a little backwards and unfair to landlords. Lawmakers' provision for renters' lockdown job losses seemed compassionate, but has proved to be misguided. The eviction moratorium provided protection for renters of government-subsidized housing who got behind on their rent. Their landlords would have to wait for payment until COVID-19 relief dollars passed through what turned out to be complex and unreliable state and local channels. To date, of the $47 billion appropriated for rental relief, only $3 billion has been dispersed to renters. Yet their landlords have had to cover mortgages, property taxes, insurance, utilities, and repair bills. The eviction moratorium expired in July 2020. In September, the Centers for Disease Control stepped in as what columnist George Will calls a supplemental legislature and declared a ban on evictions from any rental housing for non-payment by individuals making under $99,000 annually and couples making up to $198,000 who claimed pandemic-related financial injury. By June of this year, landlords were owed $27.5 billion in unpaid rents. The burden on many landlords is becoming unbearable. George Will points out that most are not wealthy. Nearly half own only 1 or 2 units. During the early days of the pandemic, a moratorium on evictions may have seemed like an efficient way to help people who lost income due to lockdowns, but it wasn't. When a solution to a humanitarian problem sounds like socialism, it probably is. Many landlords are forced into carrying renters who have little incentive to apply for relief. A majority of Supreme Court justices agree the moratorium is lawless, but Justice Kavanaugh allowed the taking to continue to its July 31st expiration. Since Congress refused to act on the moratorium, the CDC extended it. Congress is too scared to pass a law protecting private property. While the Biden administration maintains this lawless moratorium, the stealing continues. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Going to have to just be kind of round robin now, but I just thought I'd at least mention the articles we've posted. One by Dinesh D'Souza. If the sky is falling, give us a call when it actually happens. So I'll see if anybody wants to talk about that. Derek Hunter, this piece, The Hard Bigotry of No Expectations. I think I might even do a commentary on that. My wife is from Oregon. I lived in Oregon for a while. I have a lot of connections there, in which we went from the soft bigotry of low expectations to now the hard bigotry of no expectations, and that's because the governor of the state of Oregon and the people in the school board said, it's just really kind of racist, and it's the critical race theory, and it's just all this tells us that these proficiency standards, we just need to throw them out. We won't test anymore. Which is pathetic.
What could go wrong?
Yeah. And then we also have the one on the school board. I just thought I'd post that one, too, because we've been talking even with Robert Knight about what's been happening in the Loudoun County School Board in terms of critical race theory. But now the Loudoun County School Board passes transgender bathroom policy. So some of it has to do with climate change. Some of it has to do with the schools. But these are issues we need to pay attention to.
Well, we try to pay attention to them. And I think one big encouragement on these is this is where you get people that really are upset and care because it's their kids, and getting indoctrinated into the fact that, or the idea that they might be racist because they're part of this country and they're of a certain color. And then the whole idea that everything has to be reorganized in the school because there might be a person, a guy who thinks he's a girl and presents that way. It's just it's amazing that, here we are in Loudoun County, which is where a lot of people that work in D.C., a lot of very successful people live, and the left is just, they move into those kind of places. So they're in for a fight. They've had a big fight on their hands with regard to critical race theory. They're going to have, I'm sure, another one on this transgender issue.
Yeah, this is one of the things I liked about, I don't even know if you talked about this on air or saw this, Kerby, but Judge Jim Ho's recent opinion.
I did quote him the other day, but do it again, because people tune in and tune out. I read part of his opinion the other day. It was excellent, and it was probably the best analysis of critical race theory by Judge Ho, who needs to be on the Supreme Court.
Oh, God, he's got to be on the Supreme Court.
Yes.
It was he basically said the Biden policies and this critical race theory approach are racist. Neutrality is not racist. And this is a minority saying this. So he's not only not only is he brilliant, but he's also speaking as somebody who was discriminated against his whole life for being a minority. And yet he's like, this is racism. And everybody knows it is, which is, what's going on in Loudoun is so nutty on so many levels, and these examples are popping up that it's an example of what's happening in secret in some other places that people don't know about. But it's racist to tell people that because of their race, they're this or that or the other is the definition of racism. And so that's what's going on. Look, if you want to teach about history, and so, I'm reading a history book right now on the history of Texas. And there's all kinds of racist activity that occurred in there. Just horrible stuff that we have now dramatically improved as a country. That's one thing. But then to tell people that even now, because of the, color of their skin or, that they're this or that, that is the definition of racism. You're making conclusions on them based on their race, not on what they do. You're putting people in classes. In racial classes, which, is, and this is all part of the Marxist attempt, whether, you're either an oppressor or you're the one who's being oppressed. And it's not based upon you, it's based upon your class. This is what's so dangerous. So the poor, destitute person and the white guy in the Appalachians, who's, doesn't know where his next meal's coming from, he's the oppressor. But the African-American woman law professor at Harvard, who's getting all of these other things, she's the oppressed. And it's like we don't look at individuals, we look at classes. And it's just a lie. Everybody knows it's a lie. It's racism. Let's look at people based upon what class they're in. And if you can add classes, it's even better, right? If you can be LGBT and of a certain color and women and, and so I want to add all of these things, which I think most Americans look at and go, this is just absolute nonsense. In America, we look at people, and Martin Luther King said it best, based upon the content of their character, not the color of their skin. What kind of person is this? And critical race theory goes against all that, which really means it goes against what America is all about.
You know, when you look at a country, I don't think there's any country on earth that ever was or ever will be perfect. And so, you know, are there areas where there's racism? Yes, there are. There are things that can be improved. Lance Morrow, who's I think he's a senior fellow at Ethics and Public Policy Center, and he wrote about it. And he said that this movement right now, he calls it racial Calvinism, because what it means is it can never change, that you can never improve anything.
Right.
And so that's what they're
Perpetual
teaching.
guilt.
Yeah. And so, you know, we have improved over history. So Kelly's reading this book. We should all be reading these kinds of books to see what our country has done. Are we perfect in this area? No, we are not. But it's good to be become aware, I think, and teach that in school, but not what's being taught here, not this critical race theory, because it's combating racism with racism, and they even admit that. And so, it's so systemic that you can't get rid of it. That's what they're trying to teach us. And the whole idea is, yes, we have to teach that. It's so bad, we can't fix it, so we need to tear the country down. And then when you watch bills like we just talked about, adding all kinds of government programs where the government does everything for you. So they're preparing the way, they're preparing the next generation to accept that kind of a totalitarian socialist government. So, there's no accidents here that this stuff is being taught and that they're sticking to it and trying to fight to keep critical race theory and expand it. That's why we who are beginning to get a big understanding of it and see the damage, we need to stand up and we need to fight and we need to inform the country about it, and that's why we exist here at Point of View.
And that's one of the reasons why, one of the keys right now is our parents, because they're trying to teach this to your children and your grandchildren, and so they're rising up in school district after school district and saying, no, you're not bringing this into my house. And so that's why we yesterday did the First Liberty Live on the rights of parents as they send their kids back to public school. They do have rights. You are the authority over your children. Our children are not children of the state. And people need that. They need to know that so they can be bolder in standing up and being, the protector of their children. And so I would encourage people, if they haven't seen that, watch that, because what is the authority you have versus some sort of attempt to mask or vaccinate or teach things that are racist to your children? You have the authority. They don't.
Get out your pen. Again, we have the link to supremecoup.com, and we want to get that past 60,000. And so that's the first thing. Number two, we already talked about firstlibertylive.com. That would be Keisha. So that'd be another action item. And again, we have this booklet on critical race theory, which I would recommend. And just before we go, how about we recommend Tony Evans? He, on 2 sequential Wednesday nights, did, I think, still one of the best analysis of critical race theory by any Christian leader. So I would commend that to you. You can find it on YouTube. But we're out of time, and so we've covered as much as we possibly can. I want to thank Doug for his help as the engineer and Steve for their help as well. I know everybody's going to have a great weekend, and I look forward to having you join on Monday when we have Josh McDowell with us. But we're going to say goodbye. We'll see you back here on Monday right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian